존경하는 내외 기빈 여러분, 안녕하십니까?
Distinguished guests from near and far, welcome.
국채보상운동 기록물 유네스코 세계기록유산 등재 5주년을 기념하여 대한민국의 중심인 이곳 국회의사당에서 2022년도 국채보상운동 국제 컨퍼런스를 개최하게 됨을 참으로 영광스럽게 생각합니다.
It's a tremendous honor to hold the 2022 National Debt Redemption Movement at the National Assembly of Korea in commemoration of the 5th anniversary of the National Debt Redemption Movement documents being accepted under the register of the UNESCO Memory of the World project.
먼저 국채보상운동에 큰 관심을 가지고 이번 국제 컨퍼런스 개최에 적극 나서주신 유성길 국회의원님에게 진심으로 감사의 말씀을 드립니다.
First of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to National Assembly member 우수성을, who showed great interest in the National Debt Redemption Movement and made hosting this international conference possible.
또한 바쁘신 와중에도 불구하고 오늘 이 자리를 빛내기 위해 해외 각국에서 참석해 주신 발표자, 토론자 여러분께도 진심으로 환영의 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다.
In addition, I'd like to sincerely welcome the presenters and discussants who came from overseas to make this event shine despite their busy schedules.
이 행사를 총괄하여 준비해 주신 성균관대학교 오상균 교수님과 연구원들에게도 감사의 말씀을 전합니다.
I would also like to express my gratitude to Professor Oh Sang-yoon and researchers at Sungkyunkwan University who oversaw and prepared this event.
사단법인 국제보상운동기념사업회는 1990년부터 국제보상운동의 애국 정신을 세계에 널리 선양하죠. 서상동상 재정, 천동소리 회복 관해, 국채보상운동 유적지 조사, 연구, 국채보상운동 기록물 번역 사업, 그리고 기념물 조성 사업에 국채보상운동 기록물을 발굴 및 보존 사업에 큰 힘을 다하고 있습니다.
Since 1990, the National Debt Redemption Movement Commemorative Association has been promoting the patriotic spirit of the National Debt Redemption Movement widely throughout the world. We've been very actively working on various educational and promotional projects, such as our translation project, monument creation project, National Debt Redemption Movement records, discovery and preservation project, and the National Debt Redemption Movement records archive construction.
국채보상운동 기록물 아카이브 구축 등의 다양한 교육, 홍보 사업을 지속적으로 실시하고 있으며 이러한 활동을 바탕으로 매년 국채보상운동 학술대회를 개최하고 있습니다.
Doing these kinds of projects and going forward supporting them, we also support annual conferences devoted to the National Debt Redemption Movement.
2017년 10월 대한민국 최초의 경제적 민주주권 수호운동인 국채보상운동의 기록물 2,475건이 유네스코 세계기록유산으로 선정되어 전 세계적으로 역사적 중요성과 보편성을 인정받은 사실은 매우 고무적이라 할 수 있습니다.
It is super encouraging that in October 2017, the 2,475 records of the National Debt Redemption Movement documenting Korea's first effort to defend its economic and national sovereignty were registered by UNESCO as part of the Memory of the World project and recognized worldwide for their universality and historical importance.
예, 오늘 이 회의를 위해서 해외 각국에서 참석해 주신 발표자, 토론자 여러분께도 진심으로 환영의 말씀을 드립니다.
I hope that the renowned domestic and foreign academics who have gathered here today feel very welcome.
오늘 이 자리에 모인 국내외 주요 학계 전문가들의 심도 깊은 학술 교류를 통해 건실한 협력 관계를 구축하고 국가를 초월하여 학술적 연대와 결속을 강화하기를 바랍니다.
I hope that these renowned scholars, both again domestically and from abroad, will build a solid cooperation. Who have gathered here today will build a solid ground for cooperation, build relationships through in-depth academic exchange with consideration, mutual understanding, and a will for coexistence that strengthens academic solidarity and also a solidarity that can transcend national boundaries.
그리고 오늘의 연구 결과가 향후 국채보상운동 연구에 역동적인 세계 시민의 혼으로 성화되기를 기원합니다.
And I hope that the results of today's research will serve as an intellectual and emotional bridge to future research on the national debt redemption movement, and that the spirit of the national debt redemption movement can become part of the dynamic spirit of global citizens.
다시 한번 여기에 참석하신 모든 분들께 감사와 찬송의 말씀을 전하겠습니다.
One last time, I'd like to express my very sincere thanks to everyone who is here in attendance. Thank you.
네, 이것으로 인사 가늠하겠습니다. 대단히 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much, and we'll start our first presentation from Ann Gilliland, Department of Information Studies, University of California, Los Angeles. The topic will be ethical principles and practical quandaries around metadata. UCLA 저명한 교수님이신 앤 길릴랜드께서 윤리적 원칙, 메타데이터가 마주하는 실질적인 장벽 어려움에 대해서 발표해 주시겠습니다. 앤 길릴랜드.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank the organizers very much for having this opportunity to come back to Seoul. This is one of my favorite places to come to visit. I've been here several times before. And I want to congratulate you also on developing this archive. This is an incredibly important piece of history, and having it recognized by the UNESCO Memory of the World project as well. And what I'm going to do today, I am an archival studies person, I'm an archivist, and I'm going to basically do something fairly straightforward here. I'm going to set up a variety of questions that relate to this development, and I know that my colleagues who are coming after me, many of them will address some of these questions, but it isn't very often that we get to design an archives from scratch. It's a really exciting opportunity to be able to do that and to build something that is scalable and expandable and can reach out from one space of the world across all of the rest of the globe. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm just going to make a few comments about the National Debt Redemption Movement Archive and some of its possible scope. And then I want to say a little bit about the nature of archives more generally. I know some of you in the room are archives people, but not everybody is. And so maybe some of these comments are very obvious to you, but I think they're important to say. And then I want to mention some of the directions that the archival field has been moving in, particularly critical and ethical questions that have been coming up. I'm thinking about how some of those issues might be addressed through the design of this archives. And then the third thing I want to do is just to raise some questions and difficulties that come up when we think about metadata. It's sort of a truism about archives that eventually they become almost more about the metadata than about the content, and I'll explain why that is. And that presents us with some practical problems. Go backwards. Okay, so the National Debt Redemption Movement Archive really is a new kind of archive. It's not just a new archive, but it is an archive that has many different ideas behind it. The idea that you could build an archive that meets many different functions simultaneously is actually something that's quite complicated to bring into reality. An archive that can speak to multiple audiences simultaneously, to different agendas, and with that come different needs. And then affect as well, the kinds of emotions that are bound up with an archive, whether it is national pride, whether it is sort of happiness to see your story revealed, whether it's something darker as well. So what are some of the functions that this archive could perform? One is obviously as a national repository. This is a major piece of Korean history. And when we think about national repositories in archives, we think about an entity that has a certain authority and a certain standing and a state commitment behind it. But of course, with any kind of national standing, there may come an element of politicization. This is an archive, though, that reflects very closely the stories of individuals in Korea and the histories of individuals. This was a movement that people participated in all across Korea. So it has close community connections as well. And those communities are here inside Korea. They may possibly also be in the Korean diaspora across the globe. I live in Los Angeles. It has a very, very large Korean community as well. And those different populations may want to engage in different ways with this archive. For varying reasons, they may represent different generations. They may represent different uses of language or different politics. They may know more or less about the national debt redemption movement. And then the third function is, as was already alluded, the building of a global profile and the use of this archive globally. So that's always a daunting idea for any archives. We tend to be very tied to the national or local space that we work in, and we also know those audiences best, and we work in our own languages. So as we stretch across the globe, it raises some interesting and more complicated questions. And the kinds of uses that you might see being made of this archive from outside Korea, certainly educational, and educational in all sorts of different spaces, with younger children, with undergraduate students, with students who are in graduate or postgraduate programs, maybe also educating scholars on how to use the archives, or educating local communities. And obviously scholarly uses, possibly policy and political uses, and professionals, other information and archival professionals looking at this archive around the world and seeing it as a model for something that they might be able to build themselves. At the same time that this is a new archive, it's also one that has a long history. And since the materials relating to the national debt redemption movement were created, there have, of course, been many shifts in generations and many shifts politically here in Korea and in other parts of the world. It is an archive. It's not a library, and I think that means that we approach working with the source material often in somewhat different ways. And it is, as I already mentioned, this unique opportunity to design a model archives from scratch. So we hope that the design of the archives, as well as its content, both will reflect the prominence of the national debt redemption movement. So if I say a little bit now about the nature of archives, archives have, if we read the literature about archives, we talk a lot about their organic nature. Archives really are living entities, even archives that have collections of material that were created nearly 100 years ago, they don't stay static. Archives constantly can be revisited, they can be mined, they can be compiled in new ways, and by doing that, we can generate all sorts of new insights, new narratives, new responses to the archives, really infinitely. And this will happen as new audiences come to the archive. It will happen as new research questions are asked against the archive. It will happen when we apply new technologies, for example, deep learning technologies to the archive. It will happen as we build more metadata into the archives and we revise existing metadata that will allow us to scaffold new kinds of searches. And quite likely, more content will be added into the archive over time. So the archive will actually continue to accrue content. Archives also have really important interrelationships between documents that make them, those relationships very interesting things to work with. So we don't just look at the content of individual documents, we look at the relationships of documents to each other. And as we do so, we're concerned about the evidential value of archives as well as about the information that is in their content. In this case, the evidence is what it can tell us about the context within which the documents were created. What does it tell us about the creators of the documents? What does it tell us about the series of events that unfolded? Archives, however, they also need to be trusted, and they need to be able to demonstrate that their content is trustworthy. And the thing that supports all of this tends to be metadata. So where we talk in all information fields a lot about descriptive metadata, we have to talk about many other kinds of metadata in archives as well. Oh, there we are. Is that it? So, right, sorry. So one of the truisms of the digital world is that people, the public, tended to have a lot of trust in archives in libraries when they were physical and they were bricks and mortar. But when we move into a digital world, we have to earn that trust because people don't have automatically as much trust in the digital space as they do in the physical space. So what that means for archives is that they have to be able to do all these things that we can see here on the screen. And these are things that we would ask of records creators if we are trying to hold governments and bureaucracies accountable, but we have to stick to the same standards ourselves. So we have to be transparent. That means we must document how we make the decisions about how the archives is created and put together. And for example, if we're engaged in digital preservation, what the decisions and the processes are that lead to continuing to make digital copies migrating content. So we have to document all our actions. This is a kind of metadata. It's not descriptive metadata, it's a different kind of metadata. We have to be accountable. So when we take actions, we have to take responsibility for the implications of those, and we should learn from our experiences. we have to be up to date. We are professionals. We need to stay up to date with changing professional practices and discourse. At the same time, we need to be reflexive. As archivists, we in many ways shape the historical record through our decisions. We need to think about constantly who we are and why we do what we do, so we understand what our presence brings to the shape of the historical record that is passed on to future generations. And we need to look critically at previous practices and priorities and say, why were they that way? Should they be that way? Should we continue them? Should we reprioritize because times have changed? Archives have to be preserved and they have to be sustainable. And when we're talking about digital archives, that is a very hands-on activity. We can never leave archives unmanaged or unpreserved. And we have to, in order to be trusted there, we have to ensure that we have adequate expertise and we demonstrate that expertise. And as I said, we have continuity of stewardship and we have the necessary resources to do that. And finally, I would say that we need to be consultative. We need to understand not only what our own expertise is as professionals, but when we need to reach out and seek advice from experts whose expertise lies outside our own. And that may include, from time to time, also community experts. So, having mentioned community, I wanted to just spend a minute here and talk about something that those of you who are archives colleagues here will already know about, but maybe not so much outside that. What is called the Community Archives Movement, which is a big development that is happening in many places around the globe, have really challenged some traditional ideas about archives. And if we are talking about reaching out to communities and having communities participate in the development and the life of this archive, we have to ask some really important questions. So one of the ethoses of the Community Archives Movement is that the communities themselves participate in the development and the management and the decisions that are made by an archive. And so we could ask questions about, how participatory should this National Debt Redemption Movement archive be, or how participatory could it be? And to backtrack from that, step back from that just for a minute, what does community mean in the context of this archive? Who would be the relevant communities? What would be their interests? And what would they want to achieve by participating? And if we could answer that question, then we would be able to ask how would be the most effective way to engage those communities in the life of the archive. And that leads to another question about who would be able to speak for the communities and what they wish and what they need. Communities are not one single entity. They're made up of lots of different kinds of people, people from different generations, with different political persuasions. How do we build that into the archive? And then what kind of metadata would these different kinds of users want to have for the archive? And could they even contribute some of that metadata? So if we move on then to think a little bit about metadata further, and here I'm thinking mostly about descriptive metadata. How do we ensure that our metadata is really sensitive to different cultural backgrounds and different cultural contexts and actually responds to that? Are metadata standards that we could apply actually the appropriate ones in different cultural contexts? And even if they are they sufficient, or do they need to be augmented in some way? Do we need to include some terminology that we don't find yet in standardized thesauri? Should we be developing a specialized thesaurus, for example? Is it possible that different users or different source communities might be able to annotate or tag content themselves? And if they did, what kind of guidelines would we need to put in place? And then who owns that metadata if it's contributed by people who are not those who are the actual developers of the archive? Another issue that comes up, it may not be an issue in the case of this archive, is if communities are involved, do they actually not want to have all of the content made available globally or publicly, but maybe made available only to certain people or under certain conditions? And this is usually about sensitive material, or the ability to yield sensitive information from how you compile the content. And the final question about the actual mode of delivering digital archives online. If we have a physical archives, we would have a reference archivist who worked with people who were using the archives. And that reference archivist works to contextualize content when it's provided to users. Not everybody who uses an archive is a scholar in the field of the content that they're looking at. When we move into a digital world, often there is no equivalent of a physical reference archivist to work with users. So that changes the discussion about how much information they should have about not only how to use the archive, but what is the content that they're looking at, and what are its characteristics that they should be paying attention to. So I just want to finish up with a few sort of practical questions. One of them has to do with when you have many different kinds of user groups, many different audiences, and maybe you've got different generations as well, how do you support multiple or potentially competing perspectives and narratives? So do you just have an archive that has one narrative that is projected, or do you make it possible for multiple narratives to be projected or to be contributed to the archive? Is it possible with the metadata standards we have available to us to be able to show disagreement or parallel narratives using descriptive metadata? We do have to ask also about whether the metadata standards and vocabularies we have actually are the appropriate ones in a particular context, in this case a Korean context. Can we include many different kinds of metadata in order to help support different narratives and different interpretations? And how would we do that? Could we have parallel metadata maybe contributed by different people for the same content that read the material in different ways or interpret it in different ways? Or would that completely confuse users? As I mentioned earlier, could users contribute their own metadata? And what about when we want to use the archive for educational purposes? There are specialized metadata sets out there for educational and learning purposes. Would we use those? How would we scaffold the archive to support different kinds of education? And through all of that, how do we make sure that we haven't confused everybody, that this archive is transparent, it is accountable, it's clear, it's usable? Of course, this gets more complicated when you try to reach cross-language spaces as well, and also, of course, moving across different scripts as well. So if we create metadata in Korean and we want to make metadata we want to make the content available to people who are in other language spaces, maybe English, maybe French, maybe Japanese. How do we ensure that that metadata that we create in those languages actually either says the same thing that it says in Korean, so that's about semantic equivalency, or actually is more culturally appropriate for the language group that you're reaching out to. And as you move, of course, across communities and generations and histories, you move across different ways that the same language is used. And do you use an archaic term? Do you use the most recent term? What about terms that have changed meaning and perhaps are no longer as polite as they were when they were first used? And the final thing I want to say, and then I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Wayne next, is that all of this metadata, and I did say I would talk a lot about metadata because that's really what the glue that holds together archives, is how do we manage all of that metadata? We have so many different kinds, and it keeps accumulating. How do we keep our metadata up to date? How do we make sure that we're not keeping too much metadata? How would we perhaps go in and, again, for those of you who know anything about records management, maybe do some retention scheduling of metadata so that we don't have to deal with, preservation issues of digital metadata that is really extensive and in a lot of different formats, to the point where it becomes really cumbersome to manage. And I guess I would leave you with the final question about, how do we evaluate the effectiveness of our metadata to make sure that it's actually doing the job that we've set it up to do, and all of the tasks that the archive is designed to do based on that metadata. How do we evaluate that they also are effective, they're efficient, they're sufficient as well? So I'm just going to leave you with those thoughts and turn it over to Wayne. Thank you.
The next presentation is Wayne D. Framery, and he is currently professor at the Dominican University of California, and his topic is Ghost in the Archive, Exorcism and its Archival Dilemmas. 웨인 디 프레메리 교수님께서 아카이브 유령들, 엑소시즘 및 아카이브 딜레마라는 제목으로 강연해 주시겠습니다.
So first, I'd really like to again thank the organizers, especially everyone in Daegu who made it possible for us to be here. Sam and your team, you guys are always awesome. It's amazing the things that you do, and us being here is, I think, emblematic of the amazing stuff that you do. So thank you to everybody who made this possible. Following up on what Anne was describing in terms of some of the large archival questions that are kind of with us as we think about how to build and make available this archive. I'm going to follow up with similar kinds of questions, but from a slightly different perspective. My perspective from Korean studies. I worked for 10 years as a professor of Korean studies at Seogang University. And so the idea of how we build an archive to make it open, available, useful, and keep it around so that people can continue to use it into the future is of super deep interest to me. But my talk is not meant to answer any questions. It's meant to sort of, as Professor Gillian's talk was, meant to sort of ask questions that we can have at the forefront of our minds as we work on building out this archive. Ghosts in the Archive, the title comes from a famous essay in Korean studies written by a Harvard historian named Carter Eckert. And he suggested that we should excise the ghost of Hegel from Korean historiographical perspectives. Now that's a mouthful. And what he was talking about was sort of how do you think about the ways that we tell the historical narrative of Korea. And I'm going to play around with this idea of ghosts in the archive and how we might actually try to look at them clearly and see them, but that we don't actually probably want to excise them. We actually want to see them, but I don't think we actually want to take them out of the archive. So James Turner, who is a historian, has written a wonderful book on philology. Philology is the study of old languages generally, and it was kind of the science before the 20th century, especially in Europe. James Turner describes how the new discipline of history, especially in the West, is based on documents. Documents provide the basis for how historians tell their stories. Historians are usually basically telling stories from documents. So the 국채보상운동 archive becomes a place for storytelling, for using records and documents to tell stories. How to tell the story of the national debt redemption movement is actually really hard. And one of the hardest parts is, how do you start? Where does the story start? What records do we use to start? One of the traditional ways to start the story is, or at least one of the ways that it's easy to start the story, is with various incursions by Western countries into East Asia. You have Commodore Perry from the United States going to Japan and using gunboat diplomacy to open the ports of Japan, to open Japan to Western trade. This brought about huge social, economic, all sorts of cultural upheaval in Japan that we know as the Meiji Restoration. One consequence of that upheaval was that the Japanese turned around and used a very similar kind of gunboat diplomacy to open Korea's ports to the world. And with that opening to the world, again, a huge series of big what we think of now as transnational changes and conflicts took place. We have a coup, we have a rebellion, we have the Sino-Japanese War, we have these things called the Kabo reforms, which were a huge transformation of how sort of Chosun society, how Korean society before the 20th century operated, all taking place at this point. We then have the Russo-Japanese War, which at the conclusion, we have this sort of bargain whereby the United States gets some land and the Japanese basically are given authority by the West at some level to take over Korea. And we get the Protectorate Treaty in 1905, which precedes the full annexation of Korea in 1910. This story for many of you is quite familiar. For some of you it's less familiar. One of the main points here is that the 국채보상운동 archive is the place where we are going to be going to start to retell parts of this story. And it fits in this protectorate period, where you have two people basically taking stock of what's going on, looking what's happening. And part of what was happening was the Japanese were actually borrowing money in the name of Korea to support their colonial activities. And the Korean community felt that this was putting the Korean nation sort of in a bad spot, and that it was their responsibility to make this right. Now, there's a really interesting contradiction here. It was the Japanese who were borrowing the money, but still people in Korea felt obliged to, because of how they understood their place in the emerging international order, it was still, they felt, their place to engage this and try and take back some of the sovereignty that comes with economic sustainability and financial responsibility, and these kinds of things. So, again, how we tell this story is going to be dependent on how we archive and make accessible the documents from which we're going to tell this story at the National Redemption Movement. The movement itself, and many of the documents in the archive, the movement itself took place in the popular press of the time, in the newspapers and journals and things like this. So a lot of the archive has to do with basically newspapers and newspaper scraps and things like this. And it's been reformulated at some level by efforts by people in Daegu to organize this material, put it into a place where it can be accessed, to digitize it, to translate it. We heard all these projects that's going on. It's really an active an ongoing, as we were talking about earlier this morning, live process. It's an active, actively sort of developing archive happening right here at the archives. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about historiography. For some of us in the humanities, this is, again, a kind of basic idea. But historiography has to do with how you tell the story of the history and the people that you're sort of representing to the future. There are all sorts of different kinds of historiographical approaches. You have Confucian historiographical approaches, which focus mainly on how leaders have behaved. And the idea is that those histories are for leaders, so that they can use the actions of past leaders as kind of mirrors in the present to direct their activities. But of course, there's lots of other ways to tell history. Lots of movements, for example, to tell the people's history, to tell the stories of people, regular people, rather than kings and queens. And one of the key things here, and this goes to this idea of what Carter Eckert was talking about when he was railing against, and again this essay has become kind of famous, railing against the idea that we need to get Hegel out of the archive. A lot of the history in one globally prominent historiographical approach is to tell the story of people through a nation state or national framework. So that you focus, and most of the story is organized by the idea of a nation state. And this, for a variety of reasons, can become quite problematic. And for Carter Eckert, the sort of emblem of this sort of problem was the historian and philosopher Hegel. Hegel had this idea that you couldn't have freedom without a nation state. That there was no such thing as freedom without a nation state. And as Carter Eckert points out, this kind of framing and making of sort of everything related to the nation state becomes really a kind of a problem. He says the Hegelian view was in fact quite unequivocal on this point. No nation state meant no freedom, and interestingly, look at this, no history. Without a nation state, according to Hegel, you can't have history. So this is, at some level, and this is what Carter Eckert was arguing against, he was worried that the idea of a nation would control completely how people could tell histories from documents, and also from their own lived experiences. To make his point, he borrows from a short story by Hyun Gil-on called 껍질과 속살, which roughly translated means kind of like the nut, the shell of a nut, and the meat of the nut, which has been translated into English not so well as substance and shadow. In that story, we have, the story describes a diver from Jeju called Song Sun-yo. She was living a subsistence sort of life, and one day basically, and she was a diver, so her subsistence was based on her ability to dive and get shellfish and things like this. One day in the story, some pirates come and basically steal her shellfish, make it so she can't dive and get the shellfish. This enrages her and the women around her, and they storm down to the people who had stolen the shellfish. They scare them off and burn their boats down. It only becomes later clear that these were Japanese people who had stolen the shellfish. She gets arrested for this, which also enrages the community. The community then protests, trying to gain her release, and the story goes from there. But what happens after that is one of the things that, again, Carter Eckert, in terms of his assertions about historiography, robs Song of her own individual life experience. Because after those events, every kind of political ideology wants to recast her own personal experience from their own ideological frame. So a few years after this happens and Korea is liberated from Japan, there is a growing Marxist movement in her area. And a local Marxist writes her up as emblematic of sort of the workers of the world uniting and rising up against their oppressors. This, in turn, once those Marxist folks are pushed out, as South Korea begins to develop its own government, especially leading up to the Korean War and the massacres and the atrocities of the Jeju Sasam uprisings and things like this, this gets then turned around because she's been portrayed as an emblem of sort of Marxist ideology. She's then accused of not being Korean enough, and she actually gets thrown in jail again, basically because of her, because of the story that has been told about her. The story goes on from there, and there she's brutalized and really taken advantage of, and her life really takes a really dark and nasty turn. In the present of the story, we have yet another story being told, one of sort of national sentiment, and the story in the present of the short fiction of the story. In that present, the story is how she and her fellow divers rose up in the spirit of Korea, to take Korea back from the Japanese. And what happens is a young journalist is trying to tell this story accurately, truthfully, trying to document it as she presents it. But everybody in the town wants this to be a story about sort of people rising up against the Japanese. She protests this, as does the journalist who's trying to, quote, accurately present her perspectives. And nobody can understand. Why is she so upset? Why is she not just going along with what everybody wants? And the point that the story makes, and the point that Carter Eckert makes, is that she doesn't want to go along with what everyone else is talking about, because she wants to have her own life's story, the truth as she understands it, told, not what others have suggested about her life. And Carter Eckert's sort of historical point, which is well taken, is that nationalist paradigms have so dominated intellectual life in Korea that they have obfuscated, subsumed, and obliterated virtually all other possible modes of historical interpretation. He's writing this in the 1990s, when this was, I think, particularly the case, and things have changed a great deal since then. But his point was that people and their lived experiences, and Anne was talking about this at some level too, the truths of the documents and the stories as people in the community and individuals understand them is part of what I think our job as archivists and historians and others is. The tricky part here is that we have this sort of, these ghosts, these ideologies, if you will, sort of buried in the archive. My anecdotal experience is that a very deep national pride sort of animates a lot of the work at the archive. And my feeling is that we don't actually want to exercise, get rid of that feeling, right? But it certainly has to be sort of on our minds too, because it frames the way that we think about what we're putting into the archive. It frames the kind of metadata that we're developing. It frames so much of the ways that people can access the information. And so we have these very tricky problems to sort of think about. What are our ethical responsibilities? What do we have as advocates for the archive? What are we supposed to be doing when it comes to making sort of the alternative histories that could be in these documents, ones that are less dependent on a national framing, available to both the Korean and international publics? How do we think about that? How do we think about some of the ongoing inequalities of the world, such as the financial systems that keep some countries, many countries, in poverty while they're trying to pay back these huge national debts of today? How do we think about the archive in those kinds of contexts? And again, how do we think about this deeply animating and really powerful sense of community that we all feel in South Korea? Call it national pride, call it whatever you'd like, but there is really something tangible and important to recognize. And as sort of an anecdotal sort of description of this, when I was here in Korea in 2002 working on my master's thesis, it was the year that the World Cup came to Korea. It was actually co-hosted by Korea and Japan, but everyone keeps forgetting that Japan had anything to do with it. But the World Cup was going on, and I was working on my master's thesis, and I was writing away in my little apartment, 11 stories up in one of these tower sort of apartment complexes, trying to finish this chapter before the game was going to start. And all of a sudden I heard this, and the whole building went, oh, like all at once. And you could feel the whole building, like a 14-story building, moan. It was incredible. What had happened was somebody on the Korean team had just shot on goal and missed. So everyone was going, oh, that we had missed. And one of the things that made me realize was this incredible power of connection that can be felt. And it's a positive power. It can be a very positive power, and we need to sort of honor that. It's the same kind of power, and I have two images here, one of the World Cup in 2002, and one of pro-democracy movements in the 1980s, 1987. These same kinds of powers are kind of active in these kinds of movements in the 국채보상운동, and I think we need to have these in our mind as we're thinking about the archive and how we put it together. But as we do that, not everybody is interested in Korea for that wonderful sense of connection that they probably have never felt. So how do we make the archive available to people around the world? How do we solve this very tricky problem of keeping the archive for the people who have built it while also making it open and access to others who might want to learn from it, investigate it, simply play with some of the information in it? Going back to Carter Eckert's idea of, getting rid of the ghosts from the sort of historical ways that from the sort of historiography, getting rid of sort of Hegel's notion of the nation state as a framing and the only framing sort of way of looking at Korea. For historians, that's a solid argument at some level. But as archivists and people thinking about the archive, I think that's not actually the right way to go. I think on the contrary, what we have to do is recognize these ghosts in the archive, how they're there along with the physical materials, how they should be right at the front of our attention so that as we are building out this archive, we can be thinking about them as well as the documents that enable people to tell true stories about what really happened in the past. And with that, I'll thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I think we have a virtual participation from Karen Coyle, and she used to work at the Berkeley Library for a long time, and is a known and wonderful colleague and an excellent and frontier work in metadata advancement. So Karen Coyle 께서 더블링 코어 타뷸러 애플리케이션 프로파일이라는 제목으로 미리 녹화한 것을 지금 같이 듣겠습니다.
I want to talk to you about some work being done on Dublin Core for application profiles called the Dublin Core Tabular Application Profile work. You may have very simple metadata or you may have quite complex metadata, but in either case there are things that you need to define. You need to define the entities that you're going to describe. You need to define the properties or data elements that are going to be used to describe each entity. And for each property, you need to define certain things such as, is it mandatory? Is it repeatable? What type of data is required or
Recording
expected?
in progress.
And are there other rules or constraints that need to be applied to that property? And these are all things that the DC TAP helps you do. Now, why did we create a tabular application profile format? Because tabular is the most common format that's used for profiles that are created as documents. And most people are creating their profiles in a document form. The DC TAP, beyond being a document, is something that can be saved in an actionable form that is a comma-delimited format, and therefore it can actually be used as the input into programs and to other automated functions. Although, in a sense, the DC-TAP is designed for finished profiles, it can also be used simply as a metadata modeling worksheet, a way to think about your metadata and to try different designs. These these tabular documents easily turn into a DC-TAP. It helps you identify your properties, to define the constraints, to provide readability because it includes labels and notes, to group properties into shapes or units. And we want to note that it has been designed to some extent with RDF metadata in mind, but it can be used with other kinds of metadata. It is perhaps seemingly simple in that you have only 12 elements in the application profile, but it is actually very flexible and can express a large number of different situations. So this is a diagram for a very simple metadata profile, one that using the typical book, author, and publisher information. And you can see that it's quite compact, and that profile can be expressed as a DC-TAP. So the way to do this is you start with each thing that your metadata is going to describe, and you define the data elements that we're calling properties, which is the RDF terminology, the data elements that are going to be used to describe that thing. It is suggested that you use terms from existing vocabularies, mixing terms as needed, which is possible both with XML and with RDF. And there are many different vocabularies that you have to choose from today. For each property that you choose to add to your profile, it's a good idea to define the data type, say what data type you're expecting to see for that property. Because it's very important that the DC-TAP be easy to read, because we really want it to be a way that people can communicate information about their profile. There are labels and notes for all of the elements in the DC-TAP, and you can use these. You don't have to use them, but they make it possible for you to say more in a human way about your profile. You can define something that's very common in metadata and application profiles, which is that you can define what is called the cardinality, that is whether particular elements are mandatory or whether they're repeatable. For RDF-based metadata, you can define the node type, which becomes very useful, especially when you if you begin to use a validation program like Shex or Shackle. There are many ways to define other constraints. So you can say that the value must be taken from a list of terms. You can say that the string has to be a certain length. You can say that the numbers can be, you can give the minimum and maximum for numbers, such as in this one, the year of publication must be at least 1900. And there are many different ways that you can further refine the definition of your values. And this is the starter list that we have with DC-TAP, but you can actually add any others that you need. So I think that these are pretty common, that you would have a pick list of values that you can choose from. You can say the values have to come from a certain list that is defined with an IRI. People use patterns like a regular expression. You can add language tags to strings. And again, you can do the minimum and maximum length and value. Groups of properties that are shown as the boxes in the diagram I showed you are called shapes in the DC TAP. And shapes are given local identifiers, so you basically give a name to your shape, whatever you wish to do. And here you see two shapes. There is a book shape and a person shape. And the way that shapes are connected is that you can have a property that has it as its value a shape, and that connects it to the shape itself in the tap, and the only requirement being that they be exactly the same string. Now, once you save a DC tap in common limited format, it can be converted to any other format relatively easily. CSV is a form of data that it comes out of databases, and almost all programming methods have a way, built-in way to deal with CSV. So here's an example of a DC tap that has been converted to JSON, but you can convert it to other things as well. So we want you to think of DC tap as a beginning. You can extend it by adding columns for things you need that aren't there. Again, think of DC tap as being a core, as in Dublin core, always just a starting point. You can also extend it by adding other value constraint types, other ways that your data needs to be evaluated. So to get a starting point for DC tap, if you go to the GitHub area for DC tap, which is Dublin Core's GitHub area DC tap, we have templates there that you can use. You can get the CSV, which if you click on that will probably open up a Google document for you. You can use Microsoft Excel. You can use OpenOffice. So all of these are available for you just as a quick way to grab this and get started. So there's much more information at the DC TAP GitHub repo. We have a primer that gives you, that really walks you through how to create a DC tap. There is, of course, a mailing list. And if you use GitHub, you can post questions on GitHub if you have any questions for us. So that's a very, very brief introduction to DC tap. And I hope that you will ask any questions that you have, and also if you do make use of DC tap, I hope that you will share it with us. Thank you.
And the next speaker will be Professor Yoro from Aalto University, and also he worked closely with the University of Helsinki. His topic will be sharing memories of the war on the semantic web, experiences on developing 3 in-use semantic portals, and war sample and the war victim sample 1914 to 1922, and war memory sample. And 우리 이요로 교수님, 핀란드에서 온 교수님이신데 시멘틱 웹에서 전쟁의 기억을 헤아리다라는 제목으로 강연을 해주시겠습니다. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to the organizers for organizing this event. I'm really honored to be here presenting this work to you. And I guess my main message might be that I'm trying to focus on the topic of the debt redemption movement archive from a kind of practical point of view, because we have been working in Finland in related projects, trying to publish memoirs of the Second World War, which is a bit related or analogous problem that you are facing here in Korea with the debt redemption movement archives. So I will first have a few motivating words of the work that we have been doing. Then I will present a kind of practical model and a series of systems that we have developed during the 20 or so past years for publishing cultural heritage content on the semantic web. And then the most important part is probably the 3 in-use systems that I will be presenting: War Sampo, War Victim Sampo, and War Memoir Sampo, that all try to share memories of the war to the public. And then finally, questions and answers. So first, some motivating words. I also make a reference to Hegel as Wayne, and one quote that he has said is that we learn from history that we learn nothing from history. And I think what we have been trying to create in War Sampo, War Victim Sampo, and War Memoir Sampo is to prove that Hegel was wrong. You can call me a dreamer, but I think that the more we know about the price of the war, the less there will be wars. If Putin only had some kind of sense of responsibility or grief or whatever, I think he would not have invaded Ukraine. So the next question is, how can we do this? And we are sort of developing technology for the purpose and using linked open data for the purpose. And the reasons for that we chose this approach is that by using data and linking it, everybody's data gets enriched. So everybody wins by collaboration, by linking data to each other's data silos, so to say. So we don't want to have data silos, but a kind of common view of the cultural heritage. We also try to increase the value of the data by using FAIR principles. So we are creating findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data, the well-known principles that are now used in many places called FAIR. And then finally, the idea of linked data is to make the data available for the computers to understand in a way. And this is very fundamental, that if we want to make intelligent or usable systems for the public and scientists, the machine has to understand what kind of data it is dealing with. Otherwise, it's very difficult to make any useful systems. I also quote Leonardo da Vinci. He has said, "Learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else." So I guess Leonardo was one of the first linked data people in the world. At least he understood the importance of linking data. So in a way, we are trying to prove that Leonardo da Vinci was right if Hegel was wrong. So from a practical point of view, I'm now presenting then the model that we have come by and the series of systems we have been developing. So here's a line. We have, during the 20 years or so, we have been working with about 20 different systems that are now online on the web for people to use. We started with Museum Finland, Finnish museums on the semantic web, on museum collections, culture sample for tangible and intangible cultural heritage in all possible ways. We do fiction literature with book sample, and then we have lots of different biographical systems for publishing biographies of people, name sample for toponomastic research, 2 million place names, basically in Finland, for example, medieval manuscripts, mapping manuscript migrations project, academic sample for Finnish academic people, find sample of archaeology, letter sample of early modern letters, the Republic of Letters data actually, law sample for Finnish legislation, and parliament sample for Finnish parliamentary data. And in all these systems, we have been sort of using the same kind of approach, which sort of is very interesting, that the linked data idea is its application domain agnostic. it's like a Swiss knife that you can use in different kind of applications, because the semantics the semantic web provides does not make any commitment to a particular application domain. So that makes it very, very general system. The name Sampo in these systems comes from the Finnish epic Kalevala, where Sampo is something mythical that gives its owner riches and good fortune. And the most common interpretation of this is that Sampo is a metaphor of amazing ancient technology. So from the War Sampo series, we are focusing on 3 particular cases: War Sampo, War Victim Sampo, and War Memoir Sampo. And some of these systems have been very popular, actually, although they are research prototypes that we have created. For example, Book Sampo, now maintained by the Finnish public libraries, had last year, they tell 2 million users, which is quite a lot, since in Finland we have 5.5 million people. So everybody seems to be using it. Well, it's one of the major portals that they have. And War Sampo also has broken the 1 million users limit now. So it's very popular. People really want to remember and share information about the victims of war in this case. So basic model that we have here is on the left, the Sampo model. So the red circle here is a Sampo, and then outside the Sampo we have different content providers like museums, archives, media, citizens, and so on. And in the core we have the national data and ontology infrastructure. And the idea is that when these different data providers provide information, they annotate the metadata by using this shared ontology infrastructure, which means that when they put their own thing into the Sampo, it's automatically linked to other contents there through the network. This means that their own data gets automatically enriched by everybody else's data, and at the same time, the data of the other providers also gets enriched by the linking to the new piece of information in the Sampo. So this is a business model where everybody can win. And this has turned out to be very, very sort of useful for arguing people to participate in this kind of efforts for creating these samples. All the data is then published in the Linked Data Finland service that we have created. And the idea there is that we separate from a technical point of view completely the data service from the application layer. This makes things easy, and it makes also the data much more sustainable, because if somebody else wants in later times, after tens of years, for example, use the data, he or she can just use the data, and the data sort of survives much better than a combination of data and application. Applications do not live so long in general. So the idea is to use only Sparkle API here. That's a common query language in semantic web. And we use it 2 ways. We are creating these portals, practical applications for everybody to use without any programming skills, but also the digital humanities people with some modest programming skills can use the Sampo data by using different tools like Google Colab, Jupyter Notebooks, or Yaskui Editor, and so on. So that's a sort of if you know something about programming, you can use the data for data analysis and your research in very flexible ways. So the model in principle has the model is including 6 principles. 3 principles for creating the linked open data services, and then 3 principles for creating portal interfaces. And the principles for lodge services are support collaborative data creation and publishing, use a shared ontology infrastructure, and make clear distinction between the linked open data service and the user interface. And the principles for creating user interfaces are provide multiple perspectives to the same data, standardize portal usage by a simple filter, analyze, 2-step cycle. I will show some examples. And then the idea is that we support data analysis and knowledge discovery in addition to data exploration. So these tools that we are creating, they are really also meant for research in a deeper sense, not only for finding things from archives, but analyzing the content and the underlying history that the archives represent. So let's move on then to the 3 Sampo systems. First, War Sampo, Finnish World War II on the semantic web. So the historical background of this system is that in 1939, Stalin attacked Finland after Hitler's and Stalin's Ribbentrop Agreement just suddenly. So it was very much surprised then. So it started the Winter War and then the other wars related to Second World War. So this is actually exactly what now has happened to Ukraine as Putin attacked it there. So the Russians just decided that this is our territory and then come with guns across the border. The key ideas then from a point of view of end users here is that what we are trying to do here, we are trying to reassemble the life stories of all fallen Finnish soldiers in this war by data linking. So we have lots of different archives, different data sets that describe the war and people involved there. And the idea is that when we have these people, 100,000 people there, we really try to find out what happened to them and sort of reconstruct automatically their life stories, narratives. And of course, this means that the idea there fundamentally is to preserve and share the memory of the dead to the relatives, friends, and the Finnish nation in the large. And now that we have created it, it's also turned out that it's very useful data set for digital humanities research. So war historians can use it for analyzing different data sets about the war. The original linked data sets that we used are listed here. So we have 13 different sets. We have the casualties of the war as a kind of core data from national archives. Then we have lots of war diaries from national archives and 160,000 authentic photographs from the fronts. We have veteran article memoirs of the war, thousands of those. Then we have geo information about the places in the annexed part of Finland and wartime maps and historical maps from other sources. And then we have also biographies about the wartime persons. When the person is very, very prominent, we have actually biographies about him or her. And then we also created an ontology of the events, the narrative of the events, so about 1,000 major military and political actions in a timeline. And other information. And then what we constructed was this linked open data cloud or infrastructure of different sort of things there. So the most important part is probably the events. We have over 500,000 events that took place during war times. We have lots of persons, death records, prisoner records, articles, military units, 15,000. So it is actually quite a mess from a computational point of view. 26,000 original war diaries that the soldiers were writing there. And places, occupations, over 2,000 different occupations. This was also an astonishing find that there are so many occupations that these people had, and so on. And it's integrated also to the international linked open data cloud. So this is actually one bubble in the international LOD cloud officially, the war sample data. The data model, I won't go in details here, but the idea is to use events as a semantic clue of everything. But we also use document-based metadata, Dublin core, for some data. And the lesson that we learned here that actually there is no one solution typically, but you have to have different kind of metadata models or duplicate metadata models for the same thing. For example, death records are very natural to represent as a Dublin core records, but on the other hand, then we need the events. So we actually automatically generate from Dublin core records, for example, the events of being killed or being wounded or doing something else that we can find in the death records. So we use multiple ways. There is no one solution. Key challenges: data production and maintenance. I think this is really hard. When you have a huge network like 14 million different triples in one knowledge graph, and then something changes, or you want to add another piece of information there, then you have to be very careful and think very, very thoroughly how to do it technically, so that the database or knowledge graph, the quality stays as it is, so you don't want to introduce any errors there or some broken links or something like that. So we need repeatable pipelines, and we are working on this issue still. But anyway, I think we got very encouraging results. We have now the portal there. It has been there actually already for 7 years and had over 1 million users. We have got some international prizes of it, and it's been off also war victim sample and war memoir sample, so it was a start for us to do several war historical systems. For more information, you can go to this site, and you can also, of course, find the link to the real thing on the web if you want. Here are some papers. There are lots of more papers. There are, for example, 5 master's theses were made when developing the first version, and 1 PhD work and other PhD works are coming that are using the sort of results from these projects still. But let's move on to the next system. This is a kind of little brother of war sample. Here we focus on the Finnish Civil War and related kindred wars. The idea was actually to use the sample model or war sample model to the victims' data of the Civil War that we achieved from National Archives of Finland. And it turned out that people are still looking for data about the fallen predecessors 100 years ago. So even if these things happened a long time ago, like the debt redemption movement, people are still very interested in finding out relatives and what happened to them. From a research point of view, we tested a new sample UI tool for the interface design and the idea of integrating very closely data analytic tools with search and exploration. And we also sort of created models for representing provenience data from multiple sources, because in this case we got information from different sources about the fallen, and sometimes the information was conflicting. So we had to sort of represent all possible views to the data. Because we didn't know, and it's not possible to find out what is the right or the truth in some cases. Actually, what we are aiming at in this system is a kind of paradigm change in publishing humanities data. So I think that we can find 4 different generations in publishing humanities data. First there were engraved stones and printed texts, and then came online systems for searching and exploring, and this is still the up-to-date sort of systems are typically only for searching and exploring. But what we are up here is to publish the data as linked data with tools for digital humanities research. So we moved up from only publishing to human readers the data to data publishing, and one next step after this then would be to use AI tools for automatic knowledge discovery. So the idea there is that in this 4th generation, the machine could perhaps automatically find out interesting patterns of knowledge in the data and propose the human user some research questions, and also help in solving the research questions by using these AI techniques and even explaining the results. So the original system that we sort of started to make better was a very traditional one. So basically you have a form here. You would like to find some fallen person from the archives. So you, for example, tell what is his last name and where he lived, things like that. Typical form used in databases today. And then you find out a result set here. For example, in this case, I was looking for Mr. Kuula and found out there are actually 5 different persons with the same name. But I'm interested in this Toivo Kuula, and then I can select here the link, and then I would get the metadata about the person. Very, very typical system. Very rich metadata here as well. And the problem here is that this is for human consumption. The data cannot be, it's there, but you cannot reuse it, and we wanted to change that and create something much more useful for the public. So here's the first landing page of the new system that we created. It has 2 application perspectives as desired on the sample model. So you can zoom into the data through the 42,000 deaths, people who were killed during the Civil War. And then we also integrated to the data a database of the battles that took place during the Civil War. So there are 1,200 different battles that we know something about. And then by clicking on this window like this, then you can find out more about the deaths. And the idea in our system is to use a kind of standard way of getting more information. You have a semantic faceted search here. We have, in this case, we have 22 different facets from the metadata, like when the guy was born, when he was dead, whether he was red or white, what's his profession, whether he was man or woman, and so on. And by making selections from the facets, you will get a result set here. And then when you have filtered out a result set, for example, you're interested in red, that were born in northern Finland, for example. Then you get the result set here. Then you can you have access to different visualization and data analytic tools here as tabs. And if I click here, then I will get some kind of visualization of the results. So for example, here the results are visualized as a table. That's a default visualization. But then you can also visualize as a kind of pie. And in this case, for example, I'm interested in the sort of proportions of the counties where these people that I have filtered out were killed. And you can see, for example, that this particular county is the most common place of getting killed in this case. Then I can also click on the other visualization where you can see the deaths on a timeline. So you can see, for example, in this case, that I have not filtered anything out. There are still quite a lot of dead people here. That most of the killings were done, or the age of. Actually, this is about the visualization of the age of the killing. So you can see that most of them were about 20 years old, and you can select here what parameter you would like to see on the timeline. In the same way. And then finally we have also map-based visualization where you can see where these people were killed. And you can zoom in, and then when you click, for example, this marker, you will find the 9 different people who were killed in this place. And more information, of course, about the persons. So in the other sort of application view from the landing page, the battles view, if you go there, you will find a similar kind of filter-based system for analyzing the battles. But one interesting thing that we did there was actually a kind of animation of the killings. So in this case, since we know who was killed where at the moment, you can run an animation here in this address if you go there. And as the time goes by, the killings are shown as red circles. And you can really see how the sort of killings and battles started from this area here, and then they gradually move to here, where the civil war finally ended. So in this moment, for example, which is in middle of March, you can see that actually the first battles are on this front line here. So these red circles here show where most people are killed at the moment. So it's all kinds of interesting sort of visualizations and analytics can be done by using this kind of data. There are also many papers available, for example, these two about this system. Then finally, War Memoir Sampo, video interviews of Finnish World War veterans. So this is also a way of sharing the sort of experiences and views of war. And in this case, we were able to use the War Sampo infrastructure. Since we know all the places, events that took place in the Second World War, we could reuse the knowledge graph there and build on top of that this new system of videos, video memoirs. The idea is to archive and share video memoirs of the World War II veterans to the next generations. So the challenge is that we addressed here is how can you search inside a long interview video. So if a person mentions some other person or some place in the middle of a 2-hour long video, how can you find the place where this interesting piece of talk is found? And then how can we enhance the watching experience of the videos by providing contextual information to the video as the video is shown. And as a case study, we used then these war memoir videos of National Archives. The solution was to use the sample model and extend it to video viewing. We made an automatic knowledge graph creation system from textual video transcripts and faceted search and browsing, as in the war sample system, but for video scenes at the moment. And then we provided the contextual linking when somebody is viewing the videos. And this is sample model and the sample UI framework in action in another kind of application domain again. So the idea there is that we got actually the video interview so that the interviewer had already told us what the viewer is actually saying at what point. So we could actually pick Excel sheet telling with timestamps what is happening basically in this time frame of the video. And then we got the videos, and we published the videos as in YouTube after some editing of there. And then from these textual descriptions, we created fully automatically a linked data cloud here, a Sparkle endpoint basically. That was then interlinked and enriched by data from the knowledge graph of war sample and Wikidata and Wikipedia. And then on top of that, we killed using the Sparkle endpoint and Sparkle, the war memoir sample portal that you can use in this address now. I think I skipped this. Perhaps also this, since I guess I'm running out of time. But this, the main challenge, technical challenge here is how to extract from textual descriptions the knowledge and the entities that are mentioned there and map them then to the knowledge graph of a war sample. So, because names and place names are very sort of ambiguous, and you have to really think of that, how it can be done. And how can you interlink the different scenes in different videos with each other. So it's a handful of job. But we were able to do it, and we extracted the name entities and automatically also ontological keywords describing the content of the video scenes by using the different kind of natural language processing tools that were available. And the final thing here is then a knowledge graph representing the scenes in terms of the Finnish ontology infrastructure and interlinking between the different scenes by entity linking.
Eero, if you want, you can use 10 more minutes.
Yeah. Pardon?
You can use 10 more minutes.
10?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so let's have a look how it then looks, and you can go to this site. It's online, it's in use, used by thousands of people already. So in this case, we have 3 different application perspectives to the data as sort of suggested by the sample portal. So we have a view for searching full interviews. And the most important part is here in the middle. You can search for the scenes that take place inside the videos. So you can zoom into the videos more accurately. And then finally we have a semantic index here where we have indexed everything in the video scenes semantically, so that it's basically like a book index, but by clicking on that you will find the semantic pieces of information that sort of are present in some video scene. Here are some example videos then that just that people can, if you don't want to use any search, you can just click here and hear what the veterans are speaking. And when you go to the first, the sort of the scene search part, which is the most important one, then again you have the sample model here, so the user interface is exactly like in a war victim sample that you have here on the left-hand side. You have 10 facets for semantic searching. So you here, for example, text-based search. Here's the person who has been interviewed and place of interviewing. That place of what happened, where that happened. Some scheme here, and I have selected here a person from a person facet. One person, one general, Mannerheim, which is probably the most known, best known general in the war, in the war. Yes. So here you have a list of all persons that appear in the videos, are mentioned in the videos. And then you have here the unit of when they make mentions about units of war, military units. And here are some other organizations mentioned in the videos, and here is this refers to some, for example, military equipment like Stuka, the fighter, and stuff like that. So they are named entities that we have extracted from the data. And then when you make here, I have, for example, selected here Carl Gustav Mannerheim, the general, and found out that there are 40 different scenes in these videos where they speak about him. And when I click here, then the result set will include only the 40 different scenes out of thousands of scenes in the database where Mannerheim is mentioned. And the results are presented again here by default as a table. And then, as in other sample systems as well, you have here on top different tabs by which you can investigate the result in other ways. And then if I select here one particular video, then you can start watching the video. So for example, I have selected here one video, and it comes from YouTube here. And then when I click here and I start the YouTube video, the video starts running, and on the right-hand side you will see the contents of the video script dynamically. So when the video goes on, you will see what are the notes of the interviewer about this video at that particular point. And at the same time, the system automatically tells, for example, what places are mentioned here in this scene, what persons are mentioned, what units are mentioned, what events are mentioned here. And these are all links, so that while you watch the video, then you can stop it and click a link here, and then you get more contextual information about the concept that appears in this part of the video, in this text. It's also possible to view the whole video as a word cloud to get some kind of summary of the whole video, what kind of terms are there. And you can also see related places on maps. So for example, if I click here, one of these things, that is Viipuri, one of the cities that were involved in this war, then you actually are driven to the home page of Viipuri in Warsampo infrastructure. And what you get in Warsampo automatically is information about what events took place in Viipuri, what memoirs in the magazines have been published by the magazine that we included here that tell about Viipuri, and then you have different kind of photographs, authentic photographs that were taken in the place. And so I can click any of those, and then you will have more information. So for example, if I click here, you can see actually what is linked there. So you have the original memoir articles here from Viipuri. Then you have a list of different events that took place in Viipuri, different, for example, killings there or other political or bombings or something like that. And then you have lots of photographs taken there. And if I go to see photographs, then okay, there's also place. All places mentioned in the scheme, you can also approach the sort of scheme by on the map, so that you can see that in this video, for example, the interview mentions these places, and then if you click here, then you have access to that place information as well. So it's a very versatile way of sort of browsing the data. But if you go to the video thing, I think, where are these? Okay, perhaps they are not in this set of slides, but basically you have the video, for example, the photographs there, and you can see actually that there are quite a few photographs, authentic photographs from the video, and you can then by clicking one photograph you can go and see another photographs and so on. So all the photographs are interlinked as well there. Yeah. So this is actually if you are interested in the places mentioned in the scheme, and you click another button here. And then you will have a kind of picture of what places this person is sort of memorizing during the interview here. And this is just an example of the keyword cloud, the ontological keyword cloud, so that if you want to find out what this guy is telling in the whole 2-hour video interview, you can get a kind of summary of what kind of things he's telling in terms of these keyword ontologies. And then finally there's a semantic index, the third view of the portal, where we basically just provide a list of everything that is mentioned there. And if you click, for example, the second brigade here, then you will get information about the second brigade of the Second World War. And you can also find people whose interview this is, and you can also find the place basis of interview where he mentioned these places or these concepts that are listed here. So it's a kind of semantic index, a kind of extension of ordinary indices used in books, for example. And here are also papers if you're interested in more details about the technology, the natural language processing part, and so on. You can find these papers in our website. So this is a team who were working there. We worked closely with National Archives of Finland, who were sort of providing the videos, for example, and cleaning up the interview sort of texts before we started to sort of compile the practical application. Also involved very important, and actually most important part was the veteran organizations in Finland who provided and made the videos during 10 or 20 years in this archive. So that's of course the most important part, because everything is built on top of that work of sharing the memories of the soldiers. More information about each system can be found here. So there's War Sampo homepage, War Victim Sampo homepage, War Memoir Sampo homepage. There are videos and publications and more information, links to the actual portals in these pages. And about the whole series of Sampo portals, you will find information in this page. And we have our own publications, something like 500 publications related to the linked data work, and the Sampo portals can be found in this address. Most of them are available as PDFs. We try to, in some cases we couldn't do that because of the copyright issues, like a book. You cannot just put the book on the web, otherwise you are in trouble. Thank you.
Now we are going to have an honor to have Anton Isaac, and who is the European R&D manager, and he's going to address, his topic is addressing data quality issues at Europeana. Anton, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you very much for the honor to be here. It's really great to have been invited, and I hope everyone is having a great day. So today I am going to try to give you a glimpse into the data quality issues at Europeana and how we try to address them. So this is not only my work. I want to be clear about it. I'm involved in a working group called the Europeana Tech Data Committee, and a lot of the things that I'm going to present is the outcome of their efforts. So, as I don't know many of you in the audience are familiar with what Europeana is, I'm going to have first a quick presentation of what is Europeana. So it is essentially an initiative from the European Union. Europeana.eu publishes over 50 million digitized objects from something like 4,000 libraries, archives, and museums throughout Europe. We have a portal that's Europeana.eu, but we also enable machine access to the data that we have. So for programmers who want to reuse cultural heritage data, they can do so via our API. And in terms of who is behind Europeana, so we are a non-profit Europeana foundation. That's a rather small organization, but around us there's a community of more than 2,000 experts in digital heritage, so the so-called Europeana network, a small part of which you can see a picture here on this slide. And those people are working towards making culture more accessible in Europe, and actually this network effect is also visible in the way Europeana is technically organized. And I have this slide to explain what is properly inside Europeana. Because Europeana is an initiative that aggregates mostly metadata. So we have descriptive and technical information about cultural heritage work, the title, the creator, the subject, the right, and that is really the core of how Europeana can provide access. We also have some other kind of data like editorial content, things like virtual exhibitions. We also have some contributions from users, for example, transcription or various kind of annotations. And for making the portal work, we have a copy of images of the content. But this is only thumbnails. As a rule, the digitized content is still served on our partners' website. So Europeana is a portal. People find references to cultural heritage objects on Europeana, and then if they really want to consume the material, then they get to for a specific museum website, for example. And that really explains why metadata is so important. In terms of flow, the data providers, so the cultural heritage institutions, they give us this metadata and the link to digitized content, and then the metadata comes to us via what we call aggregators, which are our organizations or projects that gather data either for a specific country or for a specific domain. So we've got aggregators for fashion, for archaeology, and other domains. Now, this is the big picture, so to say, but how can metadata work for Europeana? So we try to follow linked open data best practices. So we've got a nice video which you can see for yourself after the workshop that explains why Europeana is interested in linked data, and a bit more concretely. Linked data has been important for us as an inspiration for a number of parts of our infrastructure. The first of them being the data model. Inspired by linked data, we were able to come with a data model that we think enables our service to work better, and where the data does not only consist of simple text strings, as it used to be maybe 20 years ago, but the metadata now consists of a network of connected resources that stand for either the cultural object or for entities that are around it, like the persons involved in the creation of the object, the concepts that the object is about, and this more complex representation allows to get richer data. And especially for Europeana, one interesting point is that we can get some translations. So now, instead of getting the subject of a book, for example, as just one text in one language, we can get it as a concept which is translated in several languages. And that's really important for us because we have to serve users in all those different languages. So that's the nice picture on the paper. In reality, we have a lot of data quality issues, and this presentation now enters the part where we are not really boasting what we have, because we have to be honest. When organizations they begin to embark on projects like ours, they will face those issues. So we have to be careful of how to handle them. The first one is the sparseness of the metadata. So the fact that for many objects we don't have a lot of data. So here on these slides, it's actually a bit provocative. It's an example from the past several years ago. Now, hopefully, we don't have this low-level data anymore. But it's basically an object for which we did not have a title, we did not have a description, we did not have a subject. We just knew that it was an image, and it came from a specific organization. And actually, we did not have even the image. The link was broken. So it was problematic both on the metadata level and on the content level. So very little information and no content. So that's extremely frustrating for users, of course. The second issue that we have is the one of heterogeneity. So we receive data from 4,000 institutions, as I've already said. And of course, that means that we receive data that is about many different themes, many different types of objects, and all the cultural heritage institutions, the libraries, the archives and the museums, they have different ways to describe the object. There's not one right way to describe an object. So they all do to try to fit the best practices in their field, which is good when organizations act in isolation or within a very specific domain. But when it comes to a broad domain, then there can be some issues. And we have what we dare to believe a good data model, but still there was a lot of data mapping problems, a lot of data conversion problems when our partners would give us the data. And finally, the big problem we have is multilinguality. So we receive data from 44 countries. Officially, it's in 38 languages, but officiously there are many more. This data often actually does not come with language information, or sometimes it comes with language information that is incorrect. So this is not easy to manage. And of course, the outcome of those three very broad areas where we have problems, they mean that there is an impact for the European users. For the end users of the portal, we have key requirements for good discovery, for good information retrieval on the website, which are not met. So it's hard sometimes to enable scenarios like, well, just basic search and retrieval of objects with high precision. It's hard to provide a search and retrieval of objects that work well across languages, across countries. And nowadays, when one wants to build a portal like Europeana and, well, actually even cultural heritage portal in general, users, they want to browse by dates, they want to browse by subjects, so they want a rich access to the collections, and that is not possible if the data is not good enough. And then even not on the portal, so we have this category of users that use our APIs, as I mentioned, so they really use the data, and there's a whole range of problems for data reusers. So maybe you have heard, or that has been mentioned, perhaps even today for you, there are those FAIR principles to measure the quality of data that is exchanged in scientific contexts or in more professional contexts. So findable, accessible, integral, and reusable. Those things, of course, they are much less high when there are data problems like the one that I've shown. So how we approach data quality issues. So the first solution that we try to apply is to make some basic rules that tell people what they have to give. So in our Europeana data model, we have rules that say that some fields, some metadata fields, must be present. So for example, it's mandatory to have a title or a description. There should be at least one of properties that says the temporal or the spatial coverage of an object, the subject of an object, the type of an object, so things like that. So core description. There must be something that says whether it's a text, an image, a video, or sound, or a 3D object. And there must be language information when it's a text. So I'm sorry, I'm using the technical names of the metadata fields on this slide, so maybe not all of you are familiar with them, but this is actually how things are. So behind the data model, there is a schema that formalizes the constraints, and I'm fairly sure that you have seen example of such schemas in previous presentations. For example, the one by Karen, who presented some validation rules for metadata. So our basic data obligations, they are a bit like this. So we say we look at the metadata records and we test whether some fields are here or are not here. The second level is one that is a bit softer, so to say. We don't say that a metadata record is good or not if a field is not there. What we do is that we try to measure the presence of some things in the data, and that is both for the content and the metadata. Actually, we also check the images, for example, or the sounds that we receive. For the content, which is what on this slide, we've got 4 quality tiers, which actually investigate whether for example, an image is of high quality and whether it has some copyright which allows to use it quite easily. So the higher the quality of the image, so the higher the resolution, and the more open the content is, then the higher tier it is. So the idea that, for example, an image which is in content tier 4, it will allow a lot more things than something that is in tier 0, because it will have higher resolution, so people can reuse it in more applications, and because it will be more open in terms of copyright, they can use it in more applications. So it's also a matter of reward for the cultural heritage institutions that provide Europeana the data. So the more they give, the more they get. So that was for the content. But there was nothing for the metadata except what I've presented before with the very basic data obligation. So the group that I've mentioned when I started my talk, the Europeana Data Quality Committee, they started to investigate whether we could do something on the metadata. And we have some basic principles which say that what Europeana does it must be consensual, it must be easy and rewarding for partners, it must be agreed by everyone. So that's why we set up this group to discuss those things. So that if we would make some proposal, we know that proposals are not easy to apply, we know that it's hard to get the stakeholders interested in those things, and it's hard to talk with them actually, because as you have seen in the diagram that explains the flow of data in Europeana, sometimes the organization that produces data, we don't talk to them directly. So we have to get guidelines that are clear and that are motivating for them. So we have set up a working group to make recommendation on how to go further than the basic data validation. And the first result that we had was an extension of this system of quality tiers that I've mentioned. So it's not only on content now, it's also about metadata. So we have identified 3 main pillars of metadata quality that we want to measure progress. The language, the elements of metadata that are present in record, and finally the third pillar is the presence of information about the context. And for each of these 3 pillars, we measure the quality of the data and we give a score. It's either A, B, or C. It's a bit like the content levels. The higher the score, the more scenarios are possible with the data. Excuse me. So this way, the partners of Europeana, they also have more information about whether they do better. So we don't really. So this is not about rejecting their data for the moment. It's really about measuring and saying what is good and what is less good. And so we have implemented that. So now everyone in Europeana can see how good the metadata is against this score. So again, on this slide, so that's the sort of speech that we say when we explain the score. So the more language attributes, the more happy user can access Europeana in their own language. The more metadata elements there are, the easier it is to find collections by subject, by type, etc. And the more links to context, the more links to vocabularies, because we do get this context information in the thesauri, in the classification schemes that already exist in museums, libraries, and archives. And with the more of those links to context, the better users can browse Europeana using the person, the place, or the concepts that they know about. So we have embarked on that, and now we are looking at a third option to address data quality, which is to report on what we call the long tail of problems. So we have data validation, we have quality scores, they are useful, but they have limits too. So there's still a whole gray area of data that is okay, but not so great. And we have embarked on defining what we call problem patterns, where the quality is a bit more subjective and where we try to look at those gray areas. And we want to create a system where the reports for the data provider can be more detailed, so that they can see the problems and they can act on them. And maybe even we will try to fix some of them by normalizing data. So this is an example of some of the problems that we have identified. So, for example, the first one is the use of the same title across a collection. So it could be that a collection comes to us with some good titles, but they would be repeated. So, for example, there would be a collection with many vases, and each vase has one title, which is vase, and that can be a problem, because then there's no way to distinguish one vase from the other, and we want to be able to report on things like this. So this is still work in progress, and I would like really, because this is my last slide, and I would like to give you as take-home messages that yes, we do face big quality problems. And it may look daunting, and it may look like, okay, well, this is Europeana, they're a specific project, but actually a lot of people in the field, they have those problems. So people may say, oh yeah, language, that's only for Europeana. No, actually, even projects within one country, they can get languages that are different in their collections, and they have to do a good job with it. Then the third message is that all this quality issue management require a lot of technical work, but it also requires discussion. So all those problems, they are very subjective sometimes, and it requires everyone to agree before we start making some technical work on, for example, to report them, because some people will say, oh, but your reports include things, for me they are not problems. So we need to have consensus. And for this, having some shared vision and frameworks like in data helps a lot, because we can refer to them. We can say, okay, we are asking you to give this data, but well, it's not only us, it is a best practice in the linked data community. Then, well, that's a bit repeating what I've already said. The strong commitment of everyone is crucial. And finally, all this is quite humbling. We are making progress, but this is really step by step. The steps are not very big. It requires a lot of time, and yeah, everyone needs to be aware of this when trying to manage those data quality issues. So that was my last slide. I hope that this was okay, but I have not been too fast. I'm really sad I could not be with you today, but well, hopefully you have my contact in the program, or you can ask Sam if you have any questions that there wouldn't be time to ask today. Then you can send me messages, and I will gladly answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions to Anton? Miss, you did a perfect job. Thank you, Anton. We really appreciate it. And next presentation is, I'm doing the presentation. And so being a Korean, so I will try to mix between English and Korean. And I would like to, it's a globalization strategy for managing and utilizing the national debt redemption movement. And I'm a SMO. And I forgot to mention 오늘 그 유성걸 의원님이 오늘 와서 축사를 해주시려고 했는데 좀 그 건강상에 어려운 점이 있어서 못하게 된 점을 극히 사과드립니다. I will do my presentation. And 이게 all right. The National Debt Redemption Movement. This took place in 1907 to 1910, and to protect economic property, the Korean people started to pay off their national bonds, national debts. And this was a very valuable record, and because of that, the UNESCO recognized this memory of the world in 2017, and this NDRM and created an infrastructure to systematically manage and utilize these wonderful resources. And this is done by Commemorative Association of the National Debt Redemption Movement, and establish a digital archiving system, and very hopefully the advanced one. 이 내용은 여기들 다 잘 아는 내용이긴 한데요. 일단 이 국채보상운동이 1907년에서 1910년 사이에 일어났고, 이제 일본이 우리나라의 경제적인 어떤 식민지화하려고 하는 그런 태도에서 일어났던 것이고, 한국 국민이 아주 훌륭하게 여기에 맞서서 그 위기를 극복한, 그래서 이것을 유네스코에서 아주 이 훌륭한 자료로 생각하고 메모리 오브 월드에 등재가 되었습니다. 그리고 국채보상운동 이 사업회에서 아주 훌륭한 디지털 아카이빙 시스템을 개발해서 지금 서비스를 하고 있습니다. The UNESCO Memory of the World in Korea, there are 16 of them, and this NDRM, their resources are scattered all over Korea. Korea University Library, Yonsei University Library, Seoul National University Library, and National Palace Museum of Korea, National Archive of Korea, National Institute of Korean History, Independent Hall of Korea, etc., etc. But the NDRM, this association, put all this together, and some items they have, many items, if they don't have, they have a copy of that physically. Also, they digitize everything available in digital format. And as it is, and they selected, digitize, ingest, data management, access and service, and appraisal and preservation. And so currently there are more than 4,134, and out of that 2,475 items are registered as a UNESCO registered record, and the 1,656 are unregistered items. And one of the particular things about, I think what I will do is I will simply just trying to explain in English, then I will just come back and highlight of that one. It seems to be going back and forth is much harder for me. So in the archive system, from the user side, and there are 16 UNESCO Memory World, but this one, the National Debt Redemption Movement, and we have a much more comprehensive service. Many of memory sites provide a browsing kind of a service, but we have all searching capabilities, and we are keep improving these systems. In the archive portal, we have searching service available, full text searching, and collection service and static service. From the managerial side, we have administrative system, and we manage all the bibliography, full text, and the translations, all the original image and donation list. And also we have actually the museum. It's called the Lakivium, which is a library and the archive and museum together, and we can create a new word called Lakivium. And so we are carefully translated about 1,416 items, about half of the registered one, so a little more than half, is carefully translated into English manifestos and the decorations and many others. And services available, the original text as of documents is available as an image. Then we actually typed in actual content. So actual content is stored as characters, and then we translation of modern Korean and modern English. And we are really making a sincere attempt to really global exposure to NDRM and having a conference. And last year was the starting year, and we had a wonderful conference in October, the 21 and 22nd, and we have a kind of three themes. One is distribution and access, preservation and data continuity, and data utilizations. We had, this is completely virtual. We had 170 participants, and we had continued, and the second workshops continued in the last year. But this year, we are continuing core global strategy, and this year we already had panel discussions and Dublin core conference, and also our team made 2 trips, one in the West. We went to University of Washington, Berkeley, and Stanford, and met the many folks at the library, and particularly East Asian study libraries, and introduced our resources and our willingness to collaborate, and they all agreed to collaborate with us. I just came back from Europe, the Helsinki, and the University of Helsinki, and the representative from the Aalto University, and also National Library of Finland, or National Archive of Finland, and then we went to Berlin, and the Berlin State Library, then we went to Hamburg, National Library of Economics, and then we went to Edinburgh and University of Edinburgh, and they really want to work with us. They have a Department of Korean Studies, and also there are doctoral students. They are really interested in social movement of our NDRM. And then we went to Paris. I met Anton, who is in charge of the European projects. And we are going to, we want to make our data very accessible and findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. So FAIR principle will be our guide. So we want to inform the value of a national debt redemption movement, and the core concept and important lesson is from this NDRM is about sharing and responsibility. So we are going to really expand and to see we find other wonderful countries have wonderful examples of sharing and responsibility, and we want to have a much expanded conference in 2024. And I talked about 21, 22, and 23. We want to have a really conference, which is a Dublin core conference, co-located in Daegu, and we'll have a hopefully 2-day big conference on this theme, and also preparing for 2024 conference. And so this, I think I can skip. We also, we had a meeting this morning, and we're interested in really publishing a book in English and how to really manage and help small archives in such a way, manageable, standard way, and easy to share the data. And that's something we have in mind, and we have a good plan how to go about it, and we had a good session this morning. And we'll continue global collaborations, and we'll apply the FAIR principle, and so we'll, in all our data, we'll try to kind of verification process, and we'll find the non-fair data and analyze and then define the semantic model, make the data linkable, and that's what we are going to do. And we'll also look at many standards, anyone we can adopt, and reasonably use them in a small local archive, and to help others. And so we are going to, currently our NDRM record is flat, but we are very interested in making it linkable, and lessons, and we can learn from the Euro group did, and developing an ontology, and easy to understand, and easy to browse, and everything collocated, and those we have very much in mind. So we are going to, each record, there is an agent relationships, and the record, there's all kinds of business processes have relationships. So we are going to capture rich relationships among records and agents and the business rules. So we're going to go beyond the metadata, and we want to really link our data and really exporting it and exposing it to the Wikidata. And so Wikidata is a free knowledge base and the world's largest metadata database. And it continuously, and the wonderful data is being added to the Wikidata. And so we are going to, our data will be linked to the Wikidata. From the Wikidata, it will be linked to National Library of Korea data, and many others, all the linkable ones, we are going to, one by one, and we'll expose them and link them together. And so, in terms of the data modeling for the Wikidata linkage, and from our record and documents, we are going to extract all the agents and the time span and place and event. And so that we are going to be from the flat to much using a data modeling, and so things will be collocated and link them together. And in terms of modeling archival documents, we are going to select the documents based on key figures, and we'll keyword extraction through the original text analysis, and we are going to class derivation through comparison of existing thesaurus and keyword analysis. So that's modeling and centered on relationships with people and events, and the kind of UNESCO register record featuring major events, figures, and we'll extract them, person whose metadata currently exist in the NDRM, and that's what we're going to do. And the keyword extraction through the original text analysis, and then we'll do class derivation through the comparison of the thesaurus and keyword analysis we have. And person modeling and major figures and the persons registered in the archive NDRM, and analysis of properties to describing persons focusing on major figures, and we do identification and selection of properties related to the person in Wikidata, and we'll be mapping with Wikidata. And that's what we're going to do. and so about there are about 200 people, and we are going to carefully link them together to many of their accomplishments. And then we'll do all those their properties and mandatory and recommended properties. And then we'll carefully look at and how we link them with Wikidata, and that's what this is an example of how we are going to link them together. And so about a person, and their Korean labels and English and all the proper properties is available on the Wikidata. So we are the mapping and our data to the Wikidata, and if there are some people is not in Wikidata, then we are going to create them and create an identifier, and they'll be all linked, available on a Wikidata, and similar to that. And next year we are going to so now let's see, how can I go in the beginning? That's a good question. 앞으로 다시 가는 거야. 다시 어떻게 가야 돼? Now it's time for you worked very hard. Now I will speak in Korean. So those are foreign participants, you can rest a bit. 이게 한국 분들을 위해서 우리가 이 국채보상운동을 어떻게 이제 국제화하고 잘 관리하는지 그것에 대해서 좀 말씀을 잠깐 드리겠습니다. 국채보상운동 아까 이 부분 설명을 드렸고요. 지금 이제 유네스코에 이제 16개의 한국에 등재가 되어 있는데 국채보상운동이 아주 자랑스럽게 그 중에 하나이고요. 이게 다른데 상당히 산재해 있는 것을 한데 모아서, 그리고 단지 단순한 브라우징 서비스가 아니라 모든 검색 서비스, 그리고 더 향상된 좋은 그 검색 서비스, 그리고 서로 연관된 사람들을 다 연관된 정보가 한데 모을 수 있도록 하는 그러한 계획, 상당히 향상된 검색 서비스를 제공하려고 하고 있고요. 이렇게 4,134점이나 있는 다양한 자료를, 그 중에서 2,475개 아이템이 유네스코에 등재되어 있고 1,659는 아직 등재되지 않은 상태입니다. 이런 모든 것을 우리가 이 국채보상운동에서 아주 포털 시스템을 잘 해서 브라우징뿐만 아니라 다른 데와 다르게 검색도 할 수 있고 전문 검색도 할 수 있고 컬렉션 서비스, 그다음에 통계 정보, 이런 모든 걸 하고 실제적으로 이것을 관람할 수 있는 라퀴비움도 운영하고 있습니다. 현재 영어로 번역도 많이 해서 1,416점이 아주 제대로 잘 번역되어 있는 상태이고요. 이렇게 항상 원문을 그대로 확인할 수가 있고, 그것에 대해서 한국 국문 현대어로 국문으로 번역된 것도 볼 수 있고, 영어로 번역된 것을 이렇게 볼 수 있어서 실제 해외에 가서 이런 것들이 어떤 특별한 비유 없이 바로 볼 수 있다니까 굉장히 환영했습니다. 우리가 이제 국제화를 하기 위해서 작년부터 같이 이제 저희 팀과 국제보상운동이 같이 시작을 했고, 작년에 아주 성황리에 버추얼 온라인 컨퍼런스로 이렇게 3개 팀으로 해서 한 174명이나 와서 참석을 했고요. 근데 올해도 더블린 코어 컨퍼런스에 우리가 패널을 이 국채보상운동 관련해서 패널을 진행했고, 또 실제적으로 외국에 있는 그 미국에 있는 서부의 유명한 대학, 유니버시티 워싱턴 대학과 스탠포드, 버클리 대학과 협약을 맺었고 벌써 이미 그 데이터를 공유하고 있고 또 우리 사이트에 안내도 하고 있고 그러고 있고요. 이번에 유럽에 가서도 헬싱키 대학, 그다음에 알토 대학, 그다음에 그 국립대학, 국립도서관, 핀란드 국립도서관, 핀란드의 그 국가기록원, 그다음에 베를린 주립 도서관이겠죠. 그다음에 그 에딘버러 대학, 그다음에 이제 파리의 유로피아나 이 사람들을 가서 이게 협약을 맺고 왔습니다. 앞으로 계속해서 이러한 그 국채보상운동의 아주 핵심 정신인 나눔과 책임 이것을 더 확장해서 다른 나라에서도 이 나눔과 책임을 잘한 기관을 우리가 찾아서 그들과 함께 2024년에는 굉장히 큰 컨퍼런스를 해서 그 과거에서 우리가 배워서 이제 새로운 어떤 글로벌 위기를 잘 헤쳐나가자는 그러한 그 컨퍼런스를 개최할 예정이고요. 네, 그러기 위해서 2023년에는 그런 네트워크를 어느 나라에서 어느 기관이 이런 나눔과 책임을 잘하고 있는지를 파악을 해서 그런 데와 네트워크하는 것을 2023년에 해서 물론 2023년에 컨퍼런스 하지만은 그때는 준비하는 거고 이거의 연장선에서 좀 더 크게 하고 2024년에는 대대적으로 좀 크게 해보려고 해서 그때는 좀 이제 많은 분들이 참여할 수 있고 이제 문제가 좀 이제 큰 컨퍼런스로 이제 올라갈까 그렇게 생각하고 있습니다. 그래서 그런 것을 우리가 하고 있다는 것이고요. 이건 이제 쭉 했다는 거 반복되는 것이니까 그래서 이제 그 중요한 것 중에 하나가 이제 영어로서는 fair라고 그러는데 이제 자료를 잘 찾을 수 있고 잘 접근할 수 있고 상호 운영성이 있고 재사용성이 있는 거 이게 이제 그 국제적으로 굉장히 중요한 데이터를 할 때 이렇게 4개의 원칙이 충족하게 해라 하는 건데 그렇게 우리 국제보상운동의 데이터를 이렇게 만들기 위한 모든 노력을 우리 연구팀에서 계속해서 하려고 합니다. 그렇게 하겠다는 것이고 그렇게 하기 위해서 다양한 이제 이런 기록물에 관련된 표준들을 우리가 다 점검할 거고요. 그래서 이런 그 기록물 관리하는 데서 한 그런 표준들, 그 다음에 그들이 만들어 모델 뭐 이런 것들을 우리가 참조하고, 그 다음에 이제 특히 이제 유로피아나 같은 데서 이미 우리랑 비슷한 걸 했고, 그 다음에 헬싱키 여기 팀에서도 우리랑 비슷한 걸 했기 때문에 이제 그런 것을 참조해서, 그래서 그런 분들이 지금 아주 이게 국제적으로 잘 하고 있는 그런 팀들이 우리랑 같이 협력하고 있으니까 우리가 한 것을 그들에게 점검도 받고 그런 작업을 계속 해나갈 생각입니다. 그리고 우리의 이런 그 페어 데이터를 만드는 것 중 일환으로서 전 세계의 모든 데이터가 모이고 있는 데가 위키 데이터거든요. 우리 데이터를 위키 데이터에 하는 작업, 그것을 조심스럽게 그것을 해나갈 생각입니다. 그렇게 하겠다는 것을 말씀을 드리고, 그렇게 하면은 이제 우리 국채보상운동의 데이터가 위키 데이터를 통해서 위키 데이터가 허브가 되는 거죠. 위키를 통해서 위키 데이터에 이제 국중 데이터도 들어오고 다른 모든 데이터에 들어오기 때문에 우리가 위키 데이터에 우리 데이터를 하면은 자동적으로 다른 데이터랑 이렇게 연결이 돼서 잘 알려지고 그것을 이제 원본을 보려면 우리한테 오지만은 데이터를 연결시키는 것은 우리가 위키 데이터를 방출해야만 그렇지 않으면은 그냥 우리에 와서 보기는 하지만 그 다음에 연결은 안 되기 때문에 우리가 전부 다 연결될 수 있게 하기 위해서 위키 데이터에 연결시키려고 하고 있습니다. 그러기 위해서 우리가 이제 모델링 작업도 하고 데이터가 아주 쉽게 연결되고 한꺼번에 모든 그 연결된 정보가 여러 군데 안 찾고 딱 한 사람만 찾더라도 그 사람의 모든 데이터가 연결될 수 있도록 다 볼 수 있도록 그렇게 데이터 모델링을 우리가 할 생각입니다. 그래서 이것은 더 구체적으로 그런 것을 위해서 이제 다큐멘트를 통해서 그 문서를 다 분석을 해서 문서에서 중요한 인물, 그다음에 중요한 사건, 중요한 장소 이런 것들을 전부 다 우리가 모델링 한다라는 그런 말씀을 쭉 여기에 우리가 드리고, 그래서 이제 보면은 이제 이런 형태로 한 사람에 대해서 관련된 모든 장소, 그다음에 그 사람이 한 일들, 그다음에 한 소속 이런 것들이 전부 다 연결돼서 또 그 사람이 그런 장소와 또 다른 분이 거기에 연결돼 있으면 그런 것들이 전부 다 연결된다는 거. 여기서 보면 이제 Q와 P 이런 게 있는데 이게 바로 이제 위키데이터에서는 모든 사람에 대해서는 이렇게 Q 넘버를 이렇게 주고요. 사람, 사건, 그리고 그 속성, 어떤 그 내용, 속성을 하는 것은 이 P, 그러니까 Q와 P 넘버로서 모든 게 통일되거든요. 그러니까 우리는 이제 Q와 P 넘버, 위키데이터에 그것과 우리 데이터를 이제 맞추는 작업을 하는 거죠. 그래서 우리 데이터가 이제 그 위키데이터의 속성과도 맞고 위키데이터의 Q 넘버도 맞게 딱 하면은 이제 전체적으로 거기에 이제 우리 데이터가 들어가게 되는 겁니다. 근데 그런 그 이그젬플을 한 2개만 여러분에게 이렇게 보여드린 겁니다. 그래서 이제 내년에 대구에서 이 연장선상으로 좀 더 발전된 모습으로 여러분에 다가갈 거고요. 그래서 이제 2024년에는 우리가 더 나눔과 책임이라는 큰 주제 아래서 전 세계에 이제 우리와 비슷한 많은 기관은 어떻게 하고 있는지 2가지 큰 측면에서 정책이나 이런 측면에서는 문제를 해결하는 이런 것도 있지만은 또 기술적으로 이런 아카이브 데이터를 어떻게 잘 공유할 수 있겠는지 그런 것에 대해서 함께 논의하는 그런 장소로 이렇게 잡을까 생각을 합니다. The last, but probably not the least, and we have a wonderful guest, Natasha, and so she's going to talk about Rapid Together, and we're going to have a wonderful time. Thank you very much, Natasha. Let's welcome her.
Good afternoon. It is really my great pleasure to be here. I'm speaking last, that's true, and all the important and smart things have already been said. So I'll try to add value to this meeting by focusing on one aspect which is, I think, quite important when it comes to archives, and it is the digital nature of archives. So I will be talking about the digital documentary heritage, because almost every archive that we create and collect leads to additional things that get created around it by the scholars, and that often becomes then, even if the archive itself is not digital, the content around that most likely will be digital. So I will be now talking about digital documentary heritage as something that arises from the archive and is part of the archive, but also the importance of keeping access to these digital artifacts over a very long time, because that's really where the value is. So starting generally with observation that archives are so critical for our civilization, because they help us transfer information from one generation to another. And it is the engagement around archives that then creates what we call knowledge, perhaps, insights, wisdom, the things that we want to share around across the generations. And often the archives, as we present them, they have different forms. Physical archives in the digital age are more and more presented in a digital form, if not everything, but at least some things. So I'm showing here one example from the archive, which actually shows the metadata around it. And the metadata is in a digital form. In fact, the archive is now being talked about on the website, so the website becomes a representation of the archive. So I just want to say, it is the richness around almost everything and anything that we collect is in these multiple representations that we create around it. And since we live in a digital age, that's actually the format that's most likely to be. So in this case, we have a metadata which is critical for finding the artifact, learning about the artifact. So here is often in multiple languages. So here's in English, and before it was in Korean. So it is the metadata that gives the context or guides the reader towards a meaning of the artifact. And of course, above that and beyond that comes the meaning that the user gives to it. And that's why both the access and these representations that we give access to are important. So this is what I will be talking about. We know that more and more of physical artifacts become digitalized. And it is because we know that it's much easier to spread something that's in the digital form. So these are the traditional kind of scanning stations for the books. But nowadays we also have 3D models of sculptures. So we are not anymore in a 2D, two-dimensional. We are really now becoming brave and embracing the digitalization of 3D objects, or even environments that can be created from multiple digital artifacts. So I will now show you an example of a very important documentary heritage that was created in Australia. And this is digital heritage done by Professor Rina Tiwari at Curtin University. And it's part of the Mission Connect. Extremely, extremely important initiative because it deals with a very painful history of the Aboriginal people. It deals with the history of a stolen generation, when the children were taken away and they were put in places they call missions. And so this initiative is not just about archiving, it is actually a healing process. And what is wonderful about this, even though these buildings are not there, people who remember, they are creating documentary heritage about these places. And I'm bringing this as an example where, in fact, it is a 3D modeling, virtual reality, that is being used to depict the places where these people were. So this is now a collective memory of individuals who went through the same experience. We heard earlier about importance of who get access to whom, to what, at what time. And in this instance in particular, not everything is shared with the public, because the people who live through it don't want it to be shared with the public. So there is a notion of of ethics and sovereignty. Who has rights to share with whom and what time? Now I'm coming to this again from another perspective. This is an artifact now extremely rich. There are images behind, and then there is a 3D model, and then there is interaction. All of that is very, very complex. Behind this is a game engine. And this game engine, every youth, every teenager will be able to educate you about the best game engines and the best AI that's behind. Now, in the documentary heritage, we borrow these components and we create these experiences. My point here is that we are transforming and creating it in a very sophisticated digital artifacts. And that requires special care. Because just talking to Arina, I know that the game engine that she's using is already being pulled off the market, which means it will become unsupported, which means that in a couple of years from now, she may need to take action. She may need to move it to another game engine, which means there will be an investment in prolonging the life of something extremely important, right? This is really important. It's going to stay important for decades for these people who want to inform the public what will happen to them, yet they want to do it in a controlled way, and technology is going to get in the way because the technology is not going to last. So there's a technology aspect that we need to worry about. So going back to the presentation, as we decide to create a representation of these artifacts, we need to think about what are the critical components that we need to worry about. So we have become quite good, I would say, in maintaining the copies multiple copies of, say, documentary heritage in a file format. And we also have learned the lessons. You know, you have to have multiple copies in order to make sure that some of these copies are going to survive. We also have techniques to watch whether there is any bit rotting happening, which means that we can replace files if they are not usable anymore. So I would just say that on the storage file, I think we have done as much as we could when it comes to the processes and procedures. Also, if you look what's happening, there are fantastic new trends. People are now storing information in DNAs, for example, or using the lasers to put them in the glass plates. So there are many, many more technologies coming just to take care of storage. Now, the problem is that whatever we store, we will not be able to consume, we will not be able to access and interpret unless there is software. So only when there is compatible software with the files that we store, we will be able to have the digital artifact. And that's the nature of digital artifact, that it is fundamentally computational. We humans cannot read zeros and ones, the encoding, we cannot. We need that software. And also, I'd like to point out that when it comes to digital, we can talk about artifact, but in fact, it is about experience. It is the human experience, and often it is visual because it's on the screen. We also know with music, it's audio, and we also have other artifacts that are more tactile, so you can hear vibration if you hold onto something. So I just want to say there are these senses that we humans have, and these are the only ways we can experience the digital, through our senses. And these senses, of course, can be engaged if you have an instrument to play this digital artifact. And the instrument is also very complex. It is going to be a laptop or a mobile phone, so there is a hardware with it. With the hardware, there is an operating system, and then there is a software inside. So in essence, the digital media is truly very, very flexible. It is very amenable to access and distribution, but at the same time is very vulnerable because it's dependent on very sophisticated technologies that we have. So what I'm focusing on, and I have been focusing on for a number of years now, I used to work for Microsoft Research. For 17 years, I was doing natural language processing, information retrieval, and so on. So moving technology forward constantly. At the same time of working with the preservation communities, libraries and archives, to understand what they wanted to persist, what they wanted to last. And it was that journey that opened my eyes to the importance of software. And so this is what I primarily want to share. I also started a company, Intact Digital, and the company is primarily focused on long-term usage of software. And here I'm showing two documents. They are very different, in fact. One is on the left side is something that was digitalized. On the right-hand side is born digital. But both of them use the same application, the same software. It's a PDF viewer. Yeah? So we realize that a software has multiple usage, and often different artifacts have the same software. By taking care of the software, often you can achieve the scale, because one single software, one single Adobe Reader can open millions of documents, one by one, not all at the same time. But I just want to say, having the right, taking the right care of software, we can often address many, many issues with the access that exist. And I now want to highlight one problem when the software is not available and what impact it can have. Recently, it was in December 2020, when Adobe decided that it's not going to support Flash anymore. And it was really difficult for Adobe to do anything with Flash because it was very vulnerable. From a security point of view, it was really hard to manage. So we have to understand that Adobe had to deal with this somehow. And the easiest way for them to deal with it, just to stop it. And not only did they stop supporting it, but they also prevented the players to be part of browsers anymore. So essentially, they instructed everybody, whoever's got a browser, Microsoft had to put the patches in, so no more Adobe players within, say, Edge or in Internet Explorer. So any update that you have now for Windows, we try to remove Adobe Player because of the vulnerability. Yeah? So I just want to say, this is what happened. And I mean, Adobe is still around, so we can still talk to Adobe if you need to talk to Adobe about the player. But the impact it had on many, many people who created digital artifacts using Adobe were affected, and among them is Michael Takeo Magruder. And Michael is an artist who has been producing digital art for more than 20 years. And so we worked with Michael to understand what was the impact of flash obsolescence on his work. And it has been quite significant, because Michael has created many, many digital artifacts that could be played in the browser and created through the textures that are in Adobe Flash. So he has an archive of artifacts. This archive is also on the web, so we can browse to the web to see it. Let me just show you. So this is Michael's archive online, and if you go on the works, on the internet art, you can find lots of art pieces here. They used to be able to just click and run these in the browser. So now the one in particular that we were looking at is called Worlds. So the Worlds is practically a 3D sculpture, because it uses a 3D modeling software, Cortana, and a Flash. And then all of this would be a dynamic content. It used to be that this link here, view the art, if you click on it, it used to be that you can go and download and play the artwork. And this is where it ends up now. So his whole archive practically is unusable at the moment. Yeah? So working with him, it was very instructive, because we thought, what is it that needs to be done in order to revive this archive? So if you speak with artists like Michael, they often would have in their studio a PC, and on that PC they can run their stuff. That PC is completely isolated. It may be an old PC, and it will have all software in it, and they will be able to tell you, this is how I want it to be. Sometimes when they have internet art online, they would also go to galleries, and they would bring their PCs into gallery, museum, and show it. So there are these hardware plus software packages, if you wish, that are good reference points. And they are good reference points in the sense that they give us an example of how the artist thought should be. So the question then was, with Michael discussing, what could we do to move this art back to the internet, from the box that is locked into his studio to the internet, because fundamentally this is the internet art. And at that time, when it was created in 1990s, artists engaged creating these artifacts because internet was almost like a liberation from constraints they had otherwise. It used to be you had to bring an art into a particular gallery, and people had to come to a gallery to see it. With internet, that all changed. With a browser and building things for the browser, they could reach huge, really vast audiences across the world. People could experience art at any time of the day. They didn't have to go to gallery. And artists truly engaged very actively on all sorts of issues through their art. That art is not possible to be seen now anymore, because most of them use Flash. So it's really a historical movement that is out of reach at the moment. So with Michael we discussed, if he wanted to bring it back, how can we use the information that he's got? And on the list here are the details of how his machine in his lab looks like. I'm also pointing this out. This is an important metadata. Because artifact could be, of course, you can have a video of it, you can have a photo of it, and you can describe it. But this is another part of the description that's also very, very important. So we discussed that we will virtualize the software that he needs in order to run the art piece. So virtualization is a technique where we essentially eliminate the hardware. Hardware is not as important because we have a hypervisor that can talk to the hardware. A hypervisor isolates things from the hardware. And in a hypervisor, we can put the operating system and the applications in. So this is innovation in computing, in computer science, that really serves us extremely well. So while we have a problem of digital obsolescence, we also have a solution. And the solution is really to, as far as we can, remove the dependence on hardware which we can break. And then the next thing to do is make sure that installation is equivalent to what it used to be on that original hardware. So that's the job. The job is to we have a reference, and then we create another one that is as close as possible. So what I will show you with Michael, we worked on reconstructing his art, but keeping in mind these four things. The quality is about whether this is really the same as it was, as he imagined it. Is it the same quality? And then the stability is whether it's going to be like that. I mean, whether it can be stably reproduced, so that when anybody who opens the things in the browser can see the same thing. Longevity was very important because we can do something that may last for 2 or 3 years. So we may select some installation only for 2 or 3 years, and then we need to patch it again. So the question was, what would be the decision to make to create an installation that can last for longer, keeping in mind that we will have to revisit it again. But we are trying to extend these stretches. Yeah? And the last one was really the most important. Because Michael said, I don't want my art to be in the box. I don't want it to be in my art studio. I want it back to the world. And so how do we, even if we create these virtual machines, how do we provide the access that is original kind of access from the internet? So these four things were the criteria for what he called a success. Yeah? And good thing is we have an artist we can talk to, and he can tell us what he thinks is success. Yeah? I just want to say we were very privileged and very lucky that we could do that. Yeah? So essentially what we decided to do, on one side is his archive. So this is what you saw on the web. He has documented everything. And he has the files that represent his artifact. And then we create, parallel to that, we create a software library. So these are we call them readers. This is the software that will read the files and show them to people, providing a convenient access. So I will now demonstrate this to you so you get a feeling how that actually works in practice. So from a modern computer, you can now get the files, and we already put those files into the installation. So you just go and access remotely the installations in the software library from any modern computer. And you will be able to do this in the browser. So that the sense of being it online within the browser is still there, very appropriate for this internet art. So let me just show you, again, I'm going to go to the browser, and this is essentially a portal to what we call software library. So if you have a software library account, you come here and you basically log in. And I'm going to do this now, and I'll show you what I have in my software library. There are multiple installations in this software library. So you see all of this, each of these is a virtual machine. It's prepared. And there are different types of virtual machines here. Some of them are very modern, like equivalent to Windows 10, and some of them are very old. Like this one here, for example, this one here is Windows XP. So I'm just going to show you and open you. So we can go 20 years back. And this one for Windows XP was done, in fact, for not for the libraries and archives. It was done for pharma industry. Because in pharma industries, they have to keep the data that's very, very old and I have to be able to reproduce the studies that are very, very old. So this is, for example, you will see in a minute the Windows XP with all this glory, if you remember the interfaces. But here we have a very, very old software, which is called Analyst. So this software needs to be used to reproduce studies. And I just want to show you this software in particular is at least 16 years old. And scientists can use it just the same way as they used it in the past. I'm going to show you here quickly. So the software is installed. Let me just see whether I can get some information from 2000. I think it's 2004. Yeah. But let me go back and show you what I wanted to present to you. Okay. So just. Sorry for this. If something is. I think I'm locked out on my login, so it doesn't let me start anything. Yeah. So, let me just log out. Okay. It just locked me out because we have a security and you're not allowed to. We have very strict security. So here I'm going to show you how Michael's art looks like alive. So this is Cortana 3D, is the software that is used for 3D modeling, and artists can create sculptures. So this particular sculpture here is composed of a number of individual sculptures, and each sculpture is created from, believe it or not, from a world word in different languages. And so you can explore each of these sculptures by interacting with it. So the interaction can be here. Say, I can zoom in, I can go in and see the details of the sculpture. There is also a sound, but I don't think you can hear it because we didn't get the sound connected to the speakers for some reason. But I just want to say, this is a very rich experience that people can have both in the sound and the visual, which unfortunately, as I said, it's not possible anymore because the flash is not working. In this software library, as you could see, one can access different virtual machines through different tabs. So, in fact, this, from the user perspective, is basically a browser that shows them the virtual art. We can control the access to this environment. So, just as I said, I was locked out for a moment because I closed before without sort of closing everything properly. One can present the work, which is very, very confidential, so that you can track very easily who had access to which document within this environment. So while it looks very easily accessible online, which it is very, very controlled access. So you can create scholarly desktops, if you wish, for people to have access to certain things. Let me just try to see whether I can open this one. This is another desktop where we have multiple other applications. And I showed some of that last year when we had a virtual conference. Thanks to Wayne, we had a number of examples of digital artifacts. So I'm going to show you here one which is, again, provided by Wayne, where we had a map of historical maps of Korea. Remember Wayne? Yeah. So I think it was maps that you created when you were at Harvard University. And some of these maps were supposed to show historical information, but because the information was stored, the maps were stored on the Harvard server, and the Harvard server was disconnected, then you couldn't show anymore. So this is one example where the artifact, in fact, was affected by the linked data, which was external to the artifact. Fortunately, one of these files, I think Wayne could edit so that we can reconnect with a different server, and that server hosts the historical maps, and therefore now we can see the historical map overlaid on the Google map. So this is one example where the taking care of digital artifacts involves both taking care of the file, which then has the connection with the server, with content, and in this case, it's Google Earth, because we installed Google Earth within this environment so that it is the version of Google Earth that works, and then we can always check that it works with the files, with the maps. And I also wanted to show you here another example of where, say, a flash affected people, not just in digital art, but I'll show you a couple of things that people who created very rich experiences with flash, unfortunately, will not be able to use any of that anymore. So if you have, sorry, let me just go back to examples. So here are some examples that normally, if you open a browser, so if I open a browser, I should be able to see the PDF document in the browser. So this is an advertisement of the historical movies called, Tudors. So as you know, there is a whole series of movies, Tudors in UK, and they had advertisements about them. Normally, you would be able to click here and start looking at it. But unfortunately, that's not possible anymore because the Flash is not running in the browser anymore. So we install here Adobe Reader with the Flash plugin so that we can now use the Tudors within this environment. So I can just open it, and let me just show you. So I click on it, and it plays. So again, within this environment, this Adobe player with the Flash, you do not want to put it anywhere else because it's vulnerable. It's non-secure. But because we have encapsulated in the virtual machine, and we have a safe access, then you can do it. Yeah. So I hope I could illustrate. We have a good news. I always say this is a good news because we know how to take care of the software. We have all the ingredients in the ecosystem to do that. The only thing that we have to worry now is about what are the practices. What is it that we need to do it in the right way? So I'm just going to, in the next 5 minutes, just tell you a little bit more about these practices. So just like with the archives, when we have digital artifacts, we work on metadata. So we make sure that the metadata is correct, that it's complete, and it's useful. Similarly, we now have to take care of the software. But the software requires a bit more care, and normally requires IT skills. So this is going to be a big decision for the archivists, how they're going to cover that competence. A lot of people try to do it by themselves. From my experience, it's really difficult. The best thing to do is partner with IT people. Make sure they're your friends and make sure that you work together. Because what they have to do is, it's not just once they create an installation. We need to constantly take care of this because the security changes, even access, software changes, hypervisor change, everything changes. Yet we need to keep it constant. So it's all about these practices that I'm putting here. It is the practices around remote access, about software hosting, and of course software storage, because you have to store all the files. You need to know where your files are, and you have the instructions how to install. And another aspect I just want to leave you with, this is the framework that I like to promote, because people often focus then on technical aspects. I showed you the software, and people immediately say, oh, this is my biggest headache. No, this is 1/4. This is showing technical aspect that I just showed you, whether you can virtualize and how you virtualize it. That's one aspect. And there are lots of things to deal with. Picking the operating system, picking the right combination, there's a lot to do. But that's one thing. The second thing is, do you have licenses? And what is the policy around providing access? So this is the other, the legal part, I call it. And then if you really want to run it as a service, then it's operations. And operations is a maintenance as much as, other aspects. Do you have qualified staff? Is it going to be just IT person, or do you need an archivist plus IT person? Or do you need yet another person, domain expert? Because the domain expert may be somebody in biology or somebody from history or somebody who needs to be there to tell you how this needs to look like. We had an artist, digital artist was our domain expert. And then most of all is this human factor. On the left side, we forget. We forget that we do forget. We don't, if I show you now how Windows XP looks like, and then you need to start looking even the file system, how to find things. We need to continue educating people about previous software if they need to use it. So the human factor is also extremely important. And the final one in the middle that we in computer science always ignore, the final one is the quality assurance. Yeah? In software engineering, we have testing. And test. If you're releasing the software, there's a procedure of testing. In IT, there is also procedure of maintenance. But what we are talking here about is the quality across all of these. Because the quality is going to be about, is this artifact truly something that you expect to be like the way it's shown to you? I just want to say with digital art, what we have learned, the lesson we learned is that the instrument to play this digital artifact is changing and will continue to change. So the PC that the artist has in his studio is a very different instrument from the virtualized environment. And in fact, when we're evaluating the quality of the installation of the virtual environment, we had to make some compromises, and we asked the artist whether the compromise was acceptable. So we need to be prepared that things are going to evolve over time. In case of technology, this is going to be evolution on technology side, meaning that we will be replacing bits and pieces, hoping that instrument is still going to play. Yeah. So in the final thing, 3 messages. One it is about the point of archive. Archive without software, if it has any digital representation, is not going to be complete. And it's going to be the integrity of the files and the integrity of the software together. So it's unavoidable in the digital era. It's really unavoidable. The second thing is we cannot do it alone. The software in particular needs to be taken care of in collaboration with vendors. So we need to be friends with Microsoft and IBM and Apple, with everybody who is producing software, because we need them. They need to give us licenses. They need to remove the protection on installations, because we can't install if we have authentication keys that we need to ask them for. So we need to really work with them. Yeah? And the final thing is, it's costly. This is not, people may think browser is cheap, browser is free. No. Digital requires infrastructure, and it's very sophisticated infrastructure. So there's sustainability on the technology side, and then there's economical side. And I would just want to say that the best way to secure economical side is to provide value through access. Because if there is access to the archive, that means that there are use scenarios in which it's valued. And some of that value, in some way, will be translated into resources to cover the costs. It could be donation. It could be, I just want to say, if the value is created, then value is going to come back to sustain it. Without access, it's very, very hard. Yeah. Thank you. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you very much. I think we have any questions to Natasha? Probably you are all too tired. It was really wonderful to the remote participants and the Hansung University students and from Daegu, and this was a really great conference together, and really appreciate from all the way from the UCLA, Helsinki, and you're from Doha or you're from
Cambridge, yeah.
Cambridge, and 먼 데서 오셔서 정말로 감사합니다. 다시 한번 참석하시는 우리 강사님들에게 다시 한번 박수 한번 보내드리죠. We shall meet again next year.